we played a week stint of them with Jeremy Camp as the headliner. It was so awful for me because I literally would see people, like this one lady was closing her child's ears, and it was like, I'm not swearing, I'm not like being crass, I'm literally just singing about like spiritual things, or just in a weird different way. And she was like, my child can't hear this. And it felt awful, right? It was like, we don't belong here. Like, what are we doing?
Welcome to Church Jams Now, the podcast where three former youth group kids and current music nerds deep dive into Christian music from the 90s and 2000s. I, of course, am your co-host, Kylan Savage. With me, as always, is Mr. TJ Smith.
How's it going, Kylan?
No clever pun, no witticism this week.
I just feel like I rarely take this opportunity to check in with you and see how you're doing, and I wanted to do that today. How are you?
I appreciate that. I'm okay. I'm going to make it. And we also have beautiful producer Josh.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey, how are you, Josh?
I'm doing great, too. Thanks for asking, TJ.
Good, you're welcome.
And, guys, it's our first interview in a while. We've been doing a lot of album episodes. It's our first interview. We have, of course, Jessy Ribordy. Did I say it right, or did I already mess it up? We just
Ribordy,
talked about this.
but,
Ribordy.
But it's all good. Any works.
Jessy Ribordy from Falling Up we have here this evening.
Woo-hoo.
Jessy, how are you?
I am good. Thank you for having me. And I'm doing pretty good. Allergies are a little wackadoo right now, but
Same, man. Same.
Heard that.
Yeah, we want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for being on our show.
yeah.
I want to start. I just want to dive in. We cool with just diving in, guys? Okay.
Ready.
So our show is, ostensibly about Christian music from the 90s and 2000s. And so a lot of this came about because we were all raised in church and there were only certain types of music we could listen to. But I'm fascinated by origin stories. So Jessy, I want to talk to you about, the music you grew up listening to, the first CD you bought. How did you get involved in this scene in the first place?
Yeah. So essentially, like going back to when I learned music, I was self-taught. I was pretty young, maybe around 10 or 11. Started playing a keyboard that I had, and picked up a guitar, but I'm left-handed. So the guitar was a regular, just right-handed guitar. So I sort of had like a weird time where I was kind of trying to figure out how to play it. And I was playing it backward and upside down and all that stuff. Until I just forced myself to play right-handed, because I was like, I don't think my dad's going to buy me a left-handed one.
Right. They seemed way more expensive. The exact same thing happened to me. I was like,
it's pretty messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, even like going back to spiral notebooks, like, always having to write with that spiral right there the whole time.
Oh, yeah. No, it's the worst. Or if you have to write something like on a dry erase board or something and it just like...
Yeah, just your hands.
Yeah.
Welcome to Left Hand Jams Now.
This is a left-handed support group.
No, it's a real thing. My son is looking like he's left-handed, and I'm like, hopefully he'll just learn guitar right-handed, because then he can I can never pass down any of my guitars to him if he gets into it or something like that. And left-handed, that'd be tough.
Yeah, and like even tablatures, all kinds of stuff online. It's like, it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around it. Like they make sense for it, but it still is like, you have to do an extra step of being like, oh, this is backward, I guess, or inverse. So yeah, I did that. I played music, but I grew up in. My parents were I guess they would consider themselves Christians back in the day, but they did not want any kind of organized religion, any kind of church. They were like pretty against me going to church, which is actually kind of bizarre and weird to have your parents be like, no, don't go to church. But ultimately they just wanted me to like choose and decide for myself, kind of like my spiritual path. But I was playing guitar and I played for my middle school talent show. And afterward, a youth a youth leader from a local church came up to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to play at church?" He basically like, I don't know, was there at school like scouting kids or something.
It's like a talent agent.
Yeah,
Guitarist for the middle schoolers.
And it was it was a trick. I mean, the guy's great. It was like nice, a really nice youth pastor and stuff. But I felt a little tricked, not on purpose by him, but he was like, "Yeah, come and play worship at the church, and you can play guitar." Because I wanted to play guitar or keyboard. I wanted to do something that was something that I could play, not just like join the band. Because I didn't want to play like brass and
Right.
even though I wish I could now. But so he asked me to come play, and I got there. There's like 3 guitar players. I'm little. I'm like 13 years old, and there's like 3 guitar players already. And so they were like, "Well, we don't really have room for guitar, so what do you want to do?" And I brought my dad's harmonica as a backup, which is weird that I even thought about that.
Oh my
I just
God, I
played
love
harmonica, so it was pretty awkward. But ultimately, I started playing in that worship group, and that's kind of how I got involved in church, which is kind of bizarre. That it was just essentially for music,
Right.
and as far as like Christian music growing up in my house, I listened to it. I listened to primarily a lot of bands on Tooth and Nail, and that was just because although my parents weren't like, "Oh, listen to Christian music," they just didn't want me to listen to like, super heavy or it's just like inappropriate stuff and whatnot.
Right.
Basically, like I had like a No Doubt CD, I had a Nirvana CD, but anything that got like past that, my mom would always pop her head in and be like, "What are you listening to?" I'm like, "It's this band." And then she would like have me put it away or whatever.
It's just Cannibal Corpse, Mom.
Yeah. So I started when I was old enough to go to the CD store, Sam Goody, and pick out a CD. I was always really cautious because I didn't want to get it taken. So that's where I started like buying classical music. My very first purchase with my own money was Henry Mancini's Greatest Hits.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
I just loved like the soundtracks stuff, and there wasn't really a whole lot available at the time. Like I would always hit the soundtrack section, the very first thing I would do in Sam Goody. And there's only like 5 movies, to choose from.
Right.
So that was my first CD. But then ultimately I discovered Tooth and Nail, and I was like, "Oh, this is sweet because I can listen to heavier music and not get my CD confiscated." So yeah, that's kind of like my introduction into that world of, I guess, Christian music. But the weird part of how it eventually worked out the way that it did in terms of getting signed to Tooth and Nail and being I guess I would say a pseudo Christian band at the beginning was that, I was always like a spiritual person. I still am a very spiritual person. Right. But I was initially attracted to church for guitar and for music, but ultimately I started to kind of like church because it had a semblance of what I was looking for, which was like mystery and just this like supernatural kind of vibe. And to be honest, there was only glimpses of that I would like experience where I'd be like, "Oh, they're talking about something really cool here." I mean, they're talking about death, right? Like all this stuff about death. But then it's like most of the time it was just boring. And I was always confused. But, I was young. And so when I started writing music, I would write about the things that I'd feel. And ultimately that was like some spiritual stuff would slip in there. Like I wrote, actually the first songs that I wrote were about this girl that sat next to me in algebra.
Oh yeah.
But the spiritual stuff started getting in there. And ultimately I just kind of had like this vernacular, right, from being in church that was like, well, this is how I should feel and this is how I should view things. So
you had like a language framework, right? Like a
language.
Yeah,
I think it was twofold. I think it was a language like vernacular and lexicon, but also it was like it was sort of a theology that was, for lack of a better word, like it was just incorrect for me specifically. Like when I would think about writing about something like feeling hopeless or lost or whatever, it was like that theology would always be there of, well, you're not supposed to feel hopeless, you're not supposed to feel lost. So then it would kind of like be confusing. And so that's why, like with Crashings, we can get into like how that came to be exactly, but the formation of like why those songs are a bit like bipolar is because I was trying to write these things that like I knew inside, but with a limited language that I was trying to derive from church and, stuff that I felt like I was supposed to feel. And I think my songwriting evolved and was essentially my songwriting was going through puberty. At the same time, my spiritualism was going through puberty.
Wow,
it was
great.
It was like this weird, like just crazy, tumultuous time.
So we covered Crashings on the show a few episodes ago.
20th anniversary.
Yeah, for its 20th anniversary, and I think that was kind of our big takeaway from it, right? Because for me specifically, that early Falling Up was kind of a blind spot for me, so I didn't have the like nostalgia. So we our whole thing on our show is we go through albums track by track and like as musicians kind of talk through them. And
cool.
The biggest takeaway through that was like, okay, the puberty analogy is like perfect. It was like, oh, there are seeds of something here, and I can see the songwriter that you would become, and it was really interesting to listen to. It was cool.
Yeah, that's neat. A lot of those, almost all of those songs, except for 2, were written when I was like 17. So I was, my wife and I always have this conversation because like we're big believers in, like everything happens for a reason and there's a purpose behind it. So I can't look at that album and be like, it didn't like bring me to where I am now. But at the same time, it's equally where I'm like, I think I still would be where I'm at now because I'm a driven person.
Yeah.
But I do think that, I don't regret that album. But it was a weird trajectory of, or I guess it was just weird timing because I was young. We were good live and we were really tight as a band when we were practicing, we were playing, and we were very driven. We had a guy in our band at the time. It was the founding member along with me, Tom Cox. He's just like a natural leader and like super motivated and stuff. So we just, the two of us together with that, we were like, we're going to do this band thing. So that's kind of why we were just, like workhorses with practice, and we were very serious about getting to where we wanted to be. But I think at the timing that we actually got signed was, if it would have been like a year or 2 later, I think it would have been better.
Right.
Just because I don't think that we were ready. When we got in the studio, we were ready, like technically speaking. Like I hadn't recorded to a click before I got into the studio with Aaron, but it just made sense to me. Like I was just like, oh, I know how to do this. And that told me that I was ready, but that was actually more like, okay, I was ready to record, but am I ready to decide that these songs are the ones that I want on the album?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't. But Tooth and Nail, and to get into that side, I guess they were at such a puberty time too. I mean, they were changing. We had our first meeting with Brandon Ebel at his parents' house in Oregon City. And he was like, today, just before this meeting, we let go like half of our roster because they weren't touring, and they were just kind of like bands that I signed because they were my friends and this and that. And he's like, we're looking to the future, and we want you guys a part of that. And so that speech was, very attractive to us because we were like, yeah, we want to be a part of Tooth and Nail was big to us, when I was a kid. Like I said, I listened to them. So I was like, this is it. But I really believe that because the label was going through a moment where they were trying to grow in terms of financially speaking, they were making decisions off of that and not off of, hey, is this the right band to sign? Is this a band that is going to grow? But more importantly, it's hard to tell, but if you sign a band that begins to show signs of exponential growth in a different direction, then you should, I think, early on, check yourself to make sure you're ready for that. And if you're not, then you should let that band go or find a different place for them. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. So yeah, I mean, that's getting into a couple other things, but
it was weird, like, because y'all were kind of straddling the line. They had y'all kind of both on like the Tooth and Nail and BEC side, which to me that seems a little strange. Like, was there a reason, or was that explained to you why they're like, we're gonna kind of put y'all on both?
It was never explained to us, and it was just as much of a mystery to you as it was to us, because we were like, we don't belong here. Like, yeah, no. I was writing some pretty like gospel-y centered songs on the first record and even on the second one, but even at that like point, it was still the sound and just our way was different.
Yeah, it's like, so, I mean, you guys weren't going to go on tour with Jeremy Camp.
No.
Like, it was a totally different vibe.
Yeah. In fact, later on, we played some Paramount, what were they? They're like Paramount theme park festivals or shows. There would be like 5 acts, and we played a week stint of them with Jeremy Camp as the headliner. And it was so awful for me because I literally would see people, like this one lady was closing her child's ears, and it was like, I'm not swearing, I'm not like being crass, I'm literally just singing about like spiritual things, or just in a weird different way. And she was like, my child can't hear this. And it felt awful, right? It was like, we don't belong here. Like, what are we doing? So
you guys were doing backflips and stuff. It was just crazy.
Can't see that.
No.
You're not supposed to move that way.
Right.
That's unnatural.
Big old Baptist convention. You're not supposed to dance.
Most of the shows and tours we went on, like, we crafted them to make sense for us.
Right.
And when we would tour with like open for bands, a lot of times it was, Project 86 and even Pillar, Sub 7. We played with like that whole gambit of, what was that label? Floodgate, I think. Just like, all of those kind of Midwestern bands at the time, Staple. So those bands kind of made more sense for us to play with versus like the big acts that were on BC. Which is funny because it was our own label, right? That we were on, and we couldn't even tour with them without it not making sense. So I don't understand why they stuck us on BEC. I think that they were just, my best guess is it was a clerical thing. Like they only had certain AR people who were working on, they were already taken up with these bands, and so there was a couple people on here that were probably free to have us. So
gotcha.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated by the mysterious workings of early to mid 2000s
labels.
Well, just even Tooth and Nail. It's like, because there's like, we've talked to quite a few people, and it's like everyone's truth is different, right? Like there's some people that are like, oh, they were the worst. Some people are like they were the best. And there's we'll never know the objective truth. It's just it's a Rashomon style story of Tooth and Nail, and it's like
that's actually the most vivid and correct version of the story. Is that there are kind of
a million truths,
a panoply of perspectives.
And
absolutely,
I'm trying to remember. Was your A&R John Dunn, Jesse?
For a little bit. So we had John Dunn, and then we had Jeff Carver, who I absolutely adore. Jeff Carver. He's one of my favorite people in the industry that I ever met, and I still keep in touch with him. But John Dunn was initially, yes, our first A&R. And then I think he got busy with some other bands and stuff. Yeah, our experience personally was based on, it was more about me noticing early-ish on that like we needed a different place to go. And I was hoping for the support from the label. And one of our managers put out a really good effort into getting us in some showcases for other labels. Our other managers did not, and our label did not. I was always trying to just be like, hey, could we get a showcase? When we sign a different contract, you guys would get paid. I don't know how that works, but I know that it does work that way. So I was like, that would be better for us, and it would be better for you, I think, in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
But they never wanted to listen to that. So that was my only like downfall with like a personal thing with the label. As far as contracts go, I mean, when you're 17 years old, I mean, I was 18 when I signed the contract. I'm not gonna, we didn't look at the contract.
Well,
We read it, but I didn't, I have a lawyer that like has to look over a 3-page document now that like tells me what it's saying. And so, and even when I was 18, there's no way I could have understood that huge contract.
Yeah.
But we signed it anyway. So there was a level there of like, whether it was predatory or not is not for me to decide. I think it was a business thing. I don't think it had anything to do with taking advantage of kids. But I do think that at a certain level, it's like, it really was a bad label. But I will say this, and because I have two, like you said, there's like, it goes both ways. I think that Brandon Ebel is a really great person, and I've always like got along with him, and almost everybody at the label, like I just felt like they're good people, and I never really felt like they weren't people that would at least hear me out, because they had to hear a lot of shit from me, and and I'm a really compliant person. I'm a people pleaser. I don't like to say no, but some of those conversations that I had with them near the end, like it brought out a part of me that I still never see, which is like me just being like, fuck no, like this is not how it's going to work. But I will say that with all of that to say, I just really feel like they're good people. But on the flip side, I had a meeting with a guy, he's a manager for just huge composers in the film space, and he's been around like the music industry. I mean, he knows everybody. It's just like Elton John, like he knew the Beatles, he knew like all of these people. And when he asked me like my background and I brought up Tooth and Nail, he was like, "You were on Tooth and Nail?" And I was first of all shocked that he had even heard of Tooth and Nail, but he said in all of my years in the music industry, I have never heard of a worse label than Tooth and Nail. And I was like, so he asked me what my experience was, and I was like, what I told you guys basically, but I was just really surprised to hear that. So I'm sure there are stories. I don't know, if the guy was, I don't know, maybe just like doing a bunch of coke with Elton John and got it wrong. I don't know.
Sure.
It's like,
that's crazy.
That's wild, man.
Well, I'm curious, Jesse, and kind of like how you're transitioning in the label as like y'all get started for like, as I'm curious at what point you kind of start to break away and like go from your musical puberty into writing songs and like getting into what I feel like is like the true falling up of like your writing style and musically like what y'all do. Like at what point in y'all's career is it like right after Crashings or like where you're like being like, hey, let's dive into this, what makes us different and separates and kind of makes y'all stand out a little bit on the label. But I'm curious, like what was that point and then how that was met with like,
good question, Josh,
in the band and just when you guys felt comfortable to kind of like start being yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think honestly the seeds of it were like right away. at the end of recording Crashings, I was already kind of crawling out of my skin because I knew that there were some songs that I was proud of on the album, but I was like, I was already a little bit embarrassed about it. And then Dawn Escapes, I wrote that album in 2 weeks. Most of the songs I wrote in 2 weeks. Wow. And then we recorded in 3. But the whole thing was just so rushed. It was just so rushed that and we were on the road, like, for right when our album released, I was in February 2004, and we toured nonstop for a year and a half. And then we got home for 2 weeks, and that's the only 2 weeks that I had to be at home and like see my family and friends. I had to write an album because then we were going to go to the recording studio after those 2 weeks. So that's why it was like pretty rushed. And to me, it felt a little flat in terms of just the song ideas. Like I couldn't expand beyond like a chord progression. But it wasn't until Captiva that it really dawned on me of what I wanted to do specifically. With Captiva, I actually, it was going to be something completely different. It had a different album name and a bunch of different songs. And I put together this package of my idea. It was like kind of going to be this concept record, but it wasn't super concept heavy. Like it wasn't like a theater piece or anything. It was just a running theme throughout. And I had a bunch of experimental things on there. And I put it together in a package and I sent it to the label, and I was really excited about it. And they were just like, no, we're not going to do that.
Do you remember who actually delivered the no, Jesse?
I don't remember who specifically delivered the no.
Because that's got to be a hard thing to do, right? To be the no guy, to be the one that has to be
on
like,
this like
sorry,
sprawling
artist.
work that
yeah. I honestly think that it probably was Jeff, but he's such a great guy and he's such a loving guy that I think it wasn't like a huge like hit from him, like it didn't feel personal because he had a way
he cared about you.
Yeah, and him and I had so many conversations about this thing because it wasn't a surprise to him that they received this. He knew I was working on it, and he honestly was like a big fan of what I was doing. And he even told me that so many times. He's like, if I were in charge, you would be, He was like, don't tell anybody this, but I mean, he's fine now. I understood where he was coming from. And I also, maybe not at the time, but now I understand, like, it was a money thing, right? Like they're looking at it like, this isn't going to make any money. And, from what I do know on our contract and stuff, it was, what do they call it? Cross collateralization, which is, was explained to me of, you have all these bands and then you dig a trench under one of them, and that's their debt. Like that's the money that you spent, the label paid for to make their album, right? Because the label's like the bank. So the label paid $20,000 for this band, and then they paid $20,000 for this band, and they paid $80,000 for this band or whatever. And then you dig a trench underneath. So basically all of that debt pools into one debt pool, and all of the sales pay that
Try
debt
to make it
down.
back.
Yeah,
right.
And so if you are a very low selling band, you're not putting anything toward Falling Up's debt, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some when we did Dawn Escapes with Elvis, that was like an $80,000 album that we made.
Wow.
So that was a big hole. And then, filling it up with that. So I get it. If you're running a label like Cross Collateralization, you're not going to be able to afford to have a band do a concept album, that especially one that isn't a higher selling category, because we were in the top 10% of the sellers on the label. So it was like they wanted to make sure they kept us there. So I get it as far as business goes, but it was just before Captiva when I was like, I knew what I wanted to do, and Captiva was sort of a lemonade. I made lemonade out of lemons because it was like, I knew what I wanted to do, but unfortunately I had to appease the label. And speaking of, before that, we did Exit Lights, and I thought that it was going to count as one of our albums.
Oh, gotcha.
We had 6 albums or something that we had to do in our contract. And so, it was a pretty big one. And I was like, oh, sweet, we can do a remix. So that's why I did I added some new songs on there. And the remixes weren't just slap on a beat over this song. It was more thought out. And I tried to do original ideas and stuff. And then just before the project was done, I was talking to my manager, and I was like, yeah, and it's so cool that this is going to count as an album. And she's like, oh no, no, it's
sorry,
not.
buddy.
Oh no.
So I was like, oh no, but
just did this for fun.
yeah. It was just an extra thing. I guess, in the long run, it was a fun thing to do and work on. But,
I mean, Islander is a great song that came out of it. So it wasn't all for naught. I'm curious, what happened? Did anything ever happen with those, that first version of the Captiva songs? Did they turn into anything? Did they show up later on down the line?
I used 2 of them for Fangs. I used one of them for the River Empires, my folk bluegrass project that I did. And then I still have the other ones. And the problem with those is that I'm kind of weird with my songwriting, where if I write it once, and sometimes if I record it and the recording is pretty good, but not good enough to be on an album, but good enough to be better than a demo, sometimes I get in a weird thing where I can't re-record it.
Oh,
I just
in that weird space.
Yeah, that's real.
It's not quite demoitis. It's a step.
Something in between.
Yeah.
Almost
motherfucker. Yeah, I know. That's why I haven't released the 3 albums I'm sitting on for the last 5 years or 7 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine that's probably what it's like for a billionaire to buy a really nice painting, like a Monet or something, because they are it's a painting that I am only looking at in my house, but I had to pay so much money for it. I don't know. It just, it feels like it's not something that you can do or use, it just has to sit there and be there for you. But
but mostly just for you.
Yeah, mostly just for you.
Yeah.
It's not in a museum, So it's pretty weird.
Do you think they'll ever see, 20th anniversary is not only a couple years from now. I don't know. Do you think you would ever just release it as the first version of Captiva or something?
I think that, we are doing a thing for, this year that has to do with Falling Out. I've thought about that before, and I have released demos. There's some demos that I can't because they're just bad, but there's a lot of demos that I have no problem with releasing. But as far as those ones, I don't know. It's such a it holds such a weird place for me that I feel like I have to have a lot of context. But with that being said, I am so speaking on all of this stuff. I started a series. It's just a narrative series where I'm just basically telling the whole story from the very beginning, and it's going to go all the way through. What's the title? Echo of the Night.
Yeah,
and that's going into not just the recording, but things with touring and all the lessons that I learned, and I'm keeping it pretty straight with my perspective, and also I'm not interested in any kind of bringing up band drama or anything in my series, simply because, we were young kids and we were just all of like the arguments that you have. Like if you have an argument with your wife, you're not going to like broadcast it, right? So it's like,
right. We save that for the Patreon.
But yeah, with that being said, I think that once that series is kind of more unfolded, I think that maybe with context, it would work to release those songs.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Cool. Because I do think that they might hit a little bit harder, or at least make a little bit more sense. So
yeah, they fit within the narrative that you've been able to give folks, right?
Yeah.
So it contextualizes things.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that is so fascinating where you have like almost albums or something like that. Like, I'll bring up The Boss again, but Bruce Springsteen did that, like between, like before he did Darkness on the Edge of Town, he like did like a whole doo-wop record and then like shelved it, but then like, and then he like later released in like 2010 and like re-recorded a lot of stuff. But it's like, so it's weird because you're hearing some songs from like the 70s, like 70s versions of them, and then you're hearing songs from like the late 2000s, and it's a weird mishmash, but it's still like fascinating. At some point, I mean, it becomes like music history. So it's even just cool. Like even if it is kind of a mishmash of like, this is an old demo and this was like a re-recorded version that we did for the future Captiva version. Like it's still like a very cool point in y'all's history and just like in music. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's worth pursuing.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Well, it got the Josh Olson seal of approval. So
I mean, I am a big Captiva fan, so I'm like, oh, there's a whole origin record to this.
Yeah, Captiva, like when looking back on it, it is like it's kind of a bipolar record too, in my opinion, but it kind of aged in a way that sort of works better than I initially thought. Because boy, was it an interesting time for sure in my life, but the counterpart to Captiva was Fangs, because Captiva was like me wanting to do this big project and getting shut down. And so I had to just do the album that was in between, something for them, something a little bit for me. But then Fangs, they were like, okay, we'll let you do the project that you want to do. But it was kind of like, I only used a couple songs from the original project that was going to be Captiva, because it kind of felt different at that point. Like I didn't want to just be like, okay, now I'm going to do what I was going to do with Captiva. I was like, I just want to start over and do something else. Yeah. It was like, baggage, or it was like breaking up with a girl and being like, I just need some time to get over that situation because it was hurtful. So I think that's where it kind of ended with it. And then that's why Fangs was its own crazy concept, but it was more along the lines of, not wanting to rehash the hurtful things.
That makes sense. If you listen to our 2023 wrap up, you know how much I liked History Books by the Gaslight Anthem.
But last time we talked, Kylan, you were wanting to know if this was your favorite record of the year, and you made me listen to it, or you recommended me listen to it.
I made you listen to it.
You made
it's
me
okay.
listen
You can
to
tell
it.
people.
Yeah. He forced me to listen to this.
That's kind of our relationship.
Yep, it is. But I gotta say, despite the harsh circumstances that I was forced to listen to this, I actually enjoyed it a lot.
It was good. Hey, guess what, Josh?
What?
There's more you have to listen to.
Oh, because they just came out with that EP?
That's right.
That's right, they did. Yep. But, History Books, pretty good record,
I would say so. It was my number 3 favorite record of last year.
It made my list, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My top 10 as well.
We'll see how this EP holds up, but guess what? It might be in the running. But for all of our listeners that want to experience it, what can you do? I guess you can just go stream it.
Yeah.
If you want to.
You could.
Or maybe you could buy it.
Yeah. I like that idea.
We recommend doing that. Yeah. That's a good way to do that.
100%. Well, Josh, you're so nonchalant about this. You're like the physical media guy.
Oh, well, I actually got a little distracted because I was actually looking at Collide Records' page for the Gaslight Anthem. And let me tell you, if you are a new Gaslight Anthem fan like myself, or if you don't have any of their old stuff, there's plenty for you to find on colliderecords.com. From their 59 sound album to history books to American slang to even some of Brian Fallon's solo stuff. They've got plenty available for you to pick up.
Oh, and I'm guessing it's at full price, right?
So salty, Kylan.
Well, can you keep it secret? Keep this on the down low right now.
All right.
This is just for
keep
you.
it on the
Kylan.
DL.
This is just for you.
Cool.
I can get you 20% off, bro.
What?
What would you say to that?
Oh my God.
Can you believe it?
Okay.
I can't believe it. This is
I'm
one
into
for the
that.
history books.
Well, if you, TJ, can you tell him how to get it?
Yeah.
I already told him the secret. I feel like I've spilled too much of the beans.
Well, I feel like I'm just kind of
Give me more beans, TJ.
more beans. Here you go, buddy. It's a guess.
More
I really don't
beans.
know because up till now I didn't know. Josh was kind of letting us in on the secret, but I'm just assuming that if you use those
It's
fingers,
the thing I told you earlier. I just can't tell Kylan too. It's too much of me
Got
talking.
it. Okay, got it, Josh. Thank you.
Guys, I'm
So-
right
yeah.
here.
Well, we'll let you in, buddy.
Give me more
you're in on the
beans.
secret. Here's the beans. We're gonna spill the beans. The discount code is Church Jams Now for 20% off on your
All
first
one word?
purchase. All one word, man. It's that easy. So go use those fingers and get 20% off.
I'm going to do that right now.
Make history.
Get you some beans.
Get those beans.
Jammers out there, if you're listening to this show and you want to support Church Jams Now, a great way to do that is to just get on your podcast listening app of choice and rate and review us. And you know what? We've had a couple new reviews lately. 5 stars, I might add. If that's not, is that a brag? Is that a brag?
It
to
is.
y'all?
It is.
Okay.
It's a
100%.
humble
Okay.
brag.
Okay,
But it's
it is.
okay.
I mean, but it's also true. So,
Right.
Yeah.
I thought I would take this moment to read one of them to y'all if you want to hear it.
Let's hear it, man.
This
Gas
review,
us up.
Yeah, this review is from Blue Cadet. The review goes, love this show. They go track by track through some of my favorite albums from the good old days of Christian music. Even better when they have guests from those albums. I will agree, it is even better when we have guests from those albums as well.
Yeah,
100%.
Same.
Yeah, for sure. That's our favorite thing. But you know what?
Yep.
Our second favorite thing is getting 5-star reviews from listeners like you out there. So thank you for leaving that 5-star review. And if you want to hear your review read on the show, leave us a 5-star review. Even if you don't leave a 5-star
5
review, we
stars.
might still read it. But
Yeah. No, it's very true. It's either 5 or 1, man.
No in between.
yeah, no middling.
No.
Well, I respect that people know what they're about. They're either like super into us and they let us know, or they're not and they let us know.
Yep.
So if you like that review, you can leave one of your own and then we can read it.
So, Jesse, I want to get into a little bit sort of songwriting process
Yes, please.
for you. Especially, I feel like as the Falling Up discography continued, I don't know how true this is, but it feels like, especially those later albums, you have like pages and pages of lore that we're just not aware of. Like these
within
all feel
worlds.
like movies that we just haven't seen.
Yep.
So I want to talk to you about how you go about writing songs, writing albums, thematically, things that you're looking for, kind of how you put all of that together.
Yeah. Even before I learned music, I wanted to be an actor. I thought that I wanted to be an actor because I wanted to act, but it turns out that I was just really interested in story, but
Right.
primarily the cinematic part of story. And so once I picked up instruments, it was like, this is a vessel in which I can think of something cinematic and I can play it.
Right. You can tell that
And so,
story.
yeah, that's how it like started. Just in general, I always would see a story or a movie or something in my head, and then I would write that theme to it. And so when I started writing songs, it always had that. it was sort of like a restraint a little bit. Like I wanted to write soundtracks, but I wanted to not just write the soundtracks, but write the movie and then write the soundtrack. I wanted to do both.
I get it. Yeah.
So it was like having to do that, but then I was like, well, I can't do that right now because I'm not a filmmaker and I don't have all the opportunity to do that. But what I do have is a band and that are willing to play songs with a guitar and drums and all that stuff. So it was kind of shaping that and molding that into a version of what I was sort of seeing and hearing. But it always had that feeling of a restraint a little bit over it, which I think works like for its benefit more than it works for its non-benefit. Like
right.
I think that it has more strength there because when you have control over something that feels wild, I think that it hits a little bit harder than something that is just wild, you know?
Yeah.
And so, but as far as the actual process, it's always just, I have to be alone. I could never write with my band. we could never jam. I hated jamming. I love jamming on stage when we play and stuff. And mainly I knew the audience. Okay, so here's another, just a side thing about me is that I have like an addiction to reaction. So like if I'm getting a reaction from somebody, it's like I feed it more and more and more.
Right.
And it gets me into trouble a lot, particularly with my wife and with my kids. Like even with my kids, I'll like say something that kind of scares them. And my wife has to be like, Jesse, don't keep going because I'm like, they're getting scared. So I'm going to keep going.
Oh man, I so relate to this. Yeah.
Just a fun dad movie right there.
Yeah.
Well, and we're also going to have to be very careful not to feed into that in this episode.
Yeah,
Jesse.
poker face
we're
from
gonna,
now on.
We're going to try not to enable
Just
you.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No reaction.
We're not scared at all.
But that was primarily why I loved to jam because I knew the audience hated it. And it was like, I could see it on their faces. They're just like, oh, like just want to get out of here.
On? Yeah.
And I just was like, let's keep going with this. But as far as jamming in our practice room to write a song, I just couldn't. I hate it. I would just be like sitting there. And, I wouldn't be like a dick, like just be like, oh, I don't want to do this. But it just wasn't comfortable for me,
Well, and that actually makes me think of what you were saying earlier, Jesse, about control and something wild and how you want both. You want an aspect of control and wildness. And so jamming probably for you was just wild and just chaos.
Yeah,
and like
it's all over the map. Yeah,
right.
It's come up with
And
something.
so if you have both of those components, right? Like a little bit of wildness within a greater narrative of control, then it's kind of this balanced thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it always came down to the band understand, and they picked it up pretty quickly, but some band members railed against it a little more than others. When it came to my process, and then when we got new members that weren't used to that process, that was like some problems, right? Where it was like they thought that it was supposed to be this way, but it's not this way. It's always this way. And I would hate to say it's Jesse's way because I'm not a person who's like, it's my way or the highway, but I had to be able to write on my own first. And I would write as much as I wanted. And the people like Jeremy, our bass player, who would never ever be offended that I would sometimes write a bass part. If I came to the band with a song and in that song I had a bass part that was there, Jeremy would never be like, oh, like you wrote my part for me.
It's good to have those people. You got to have like the super chill person. It's just like, this is
they
cool.
can just roll with it.
Yeah. Which I honestly, it was probably hard. It would be hard for me too. Like somebody, but then again, like that's because I'm a songwriter and I have to be able to control that aspect. But that's not to say that I wouldn't love collaboration. I had to get out all that I could on the song first. And if that meant everything, including drums, then that was it. But if it was just a piano line and a vocal melody and a chord progression, and I was like, I tried some guitar and I just couldn't think of it, tried some bass, couldn't think of it, tried some drums, couldn't think of it, then I would be excited to go to the band, because I would be like, you guys are going to make this song a song, like more of a song, right? And they would always just fucking like, make it amazing and do the things that I could never think of. And those were the times that I loved the most with writing. But yeah, my process is always that.
Jesse, it reminds me, excuse me, Josh and TJ, I'm going to turn this into a movie podcast again, but this seems appropriate.
Here we go.
Right?
Here
it's appropriate, right? Jesse, the analogy or the one-to-one that kind of comes to mind for me is like, you think of someone like Martin Scorsese, right? Who's seen as like an auteur, but then he's got Thelma Schoonmaker who like edits all of his movies.
Yeah.
And he like trusts her to do that. And it's that magic of like, he'll take it to the 1 yard line and he'll have like all of these ideas and it's really very like auteurish. Mm-hmm. But that little sprinkle of collaboration of like, he never would have thought to make this edit that makes all those movies fucking incredible.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that analogy works great because in the editing room, you're doing work that translates to what people can watch. So it's a weird thing because yes, you can't just edit nothing. So therefore that job doesn't exist. You can tell a story without editing, but is that story going to sell? Is that story going to be digestible? Yeah. Then the answer is no, most of the time. So that's kind of the best way to describe it when it comes to how I'd write songs is that I could play the song. The song can exist without the other guys because I wrote this song and it's a melody and it's a chord progression. And even if it's just on piano or even if it's just on guitar or even if I'm just singing a cappella, it's still a song.
Right.
And you could just play a drum part. Would that be considered a song? I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's some drums that just are soloed out that are like iconic, but it's few and far between of like, you're just listening to somebody play the drums or you're just listening to somebody play the bass, but they make it translate from me in my room to here's something that everybody can listen to.
Resonate with everybody.
So I guess the second fold for me was that I had to learn early on, like how to filter myself because I would go to, I write a lot and I write a lot of shitty songs. So those songs I throw away or I'm like, I'm going to hide this on my hard drive. So out of like 20 songs, I would take the ones that I wanted to take to the band, right? So I would already have went through my own filter process when I would take a song to the band. And the thing that I appreciated is when everybody else would do the same. So like they would work hard to come up with a guitar line that like they had to work through it, didn't start well. It was kind of bad at first or whatever. And it goes through this process until it finally gets there. What I didn't like is when it was like, oh, I'm entitled to play this part because I'm this guitar player, whatever. Then it's like, here's my part without any filter at all. And I guess that's like a projection, but I also felt like it should have been understood in some scenarios where it's like, I would like to be able to have you guys also filter yourselves,
Well, a good collaborator understands the end goal, right?
Yeah.
So when you have a team of people that all kind of understand how to serve the song, how to serve the record in whatever capacity, you're going to sense that as the songwriter, like bringing the work to the table and saying, okay, help me get this over the line into the form that it's going to hit thousands, millions of years. Help me get it there. when you hear that they took the care and the consideration to bring you something that's worthy of the song in the first place, that just, it locks in, right? And you can all feel the care that you each brought to the table in working on this collaborative work.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
That's really cool, man. I love hearing about just y'all's process and the intricate connective points and layers that have to happen before, it hits streaming or whether it was in the CD era. Like,
yeah,
it's fascinating.
Jesse, do you have any examples of a song that like had the most minimal amount of like edits or adjustments to it? Like you brought it and it almost like that's the closest it was to its original form, and then one that maybe like underwent the most changes. Any that you can think of off the top of your head?
I mean, pretty much all of the songs, I'd say not 100% sure, but 98% sure all of the songs on the final album were that. But specifically, I would say Hydro was a song that was probably just as very little of anybody else on it as possible. The littlest amount of stuff. I mean, there was a lot of songs on Crashings where it was just a verse and a chorus, melody and a progression. I'm trying to think of, when we were doing Fangs, so Casey Crescenzo is just my favorite of all time, musician, songwriter. To me, he's just a living genius. I've watched the guy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Deer Hunter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've watched him work on a guitar solo for, I think, one of the albums on the Color Spectrum. He was working on a song, and he was doing these guitar solos, and he would just record. He's just sitting there in his studio with the guitar, and he was just like doing the most beautiful and amazing guitar solo I've ever heard. And then he would stop it and then delete it. And I was like, "What are you doing? Like, get that back. I'll take it. What are you doing?" And he was like, "It's not, it's not good enough." And then he'd do another one, and then he'd delete it, and then he'd do another one. It was like 5 or 6, and then finally it was the one he chose was definitely better than all the other ones. But I was like, I couldn't understand how somebody could do that. So to me, Casey has always been like just leagues above everybody that I've ever heard. And so when I was working with him on Fangs, I think it was Golden Arrows. I had that song. It was like a verse and a chorus, and it was just on piano, and we recorded it, and just didn't feel right. There's just something not hitting about it. And he said, "Guys, can you take a break?" And we went out, took a break, and we came back, and he just like pieced together this masterpiece of a song using like all these different things. And he played guitar in there and bass, and pasted Josh's drums in another song and like put it in there. And so it was like primarily his construction on that song. And so I always love things like that. And that's a prime example of a time where I was just like, this is amazing, because it makes the album great, right? Like I wasn't bothered that he did almost all of the stuff on it, right? It was like, right, if it makes the album awesome, if it makes the song better than it was, then yeah, absolutely.
He was your Thelma.
Yeah, absolutely. And most of the time I will say that like, even on like, I guess even on the final album, self-titled, it was, even though I wrote everything on there, obviously I didn't play the drums. Josh played the drums. And he had like a lot of beats and stuff on there that he came up with. But I will say that like even the bass and guitar and stuff, there was a lot of stuff added right throughout it. But those songs in entirely like structure and whatnot, it's always hard with songs because you break them down to like what is the song at its heart, or what is considered writing on the song, you know, and that's a conversation I've had with people before, because I don't consider lyrics being 50% of like songwriting. I think that it's like 20%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but a lot of people disagree. Like people will be like, no, that's not, if you have a singer and they're singing, the lyrics are half of the way that it's, you know, working as a song. But I just feel like you can think of a lot of different words that also work in there. Right. So it's like, you know, are you saying the meaning of it, or are you just saying the lyrics of it? So anyways, but
yeah, no, that resonates with me as like a vibe guy. I never know what any song is about anyway. And that makes sense to me, knowing like, I feel like your trajectory and kind of where you're at now. Like I feel like you've kind of always been a composer, right? Like even from like the early days of Falling Up. So I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now, because I'm fascinated by this. What TJ?
I was gonna say, just to like piggyback on that question, like to juxtapose or recontextualize Kylan's assumption that you were always a composer, Jesse. Were you always a composer? What, like, or if you were, if Kylan's right, and I'm not saying he's not, but
I'm not.
If he's right,
it's always it's felt like that. Like
I know, I agree, but I want to hear it from the source. Like when did you sort of like, when did that dawn on you? When did you have the revelation of like, oh, that's what I've been doing this whole time. I'm a composer. I want to write scores. I want to arrange. You know, this is my world. I want to work for music houses and write for film and TV and develop all these different conceptual things that at their base like are cinematic in scope. Like what did that understanding and that realization look like? When did it happen? And yes, also catch us up, take us to this moment. You know, it's a big question, but
yeah,
we've trusted you with this journey so far, and you haven't led us astray once. So I know you can do it, Jesse.
I think that you know, kind of like I said, when I was younger and first learning music, that's what I wanted to do. But then when the band opportunity came in high school, I was sort of blinded by that. You know, it was like I kind of forgot about it. Sort of like how even when I was really little, I wanted to be a, you know, marine biologist, whatever. So it's like that idea is, I kind of looked at it like, oh, that's something that I used to want to do, and now I want to do this band thing. But it wasn't long. It was in Dawn Escapes where I was already like feeling the need to write scores in between songs. And on Dawn Escapes, I didn't have a chance to because it was so rushed. And then the Captiva project fell through. So it was like I was already at that point trying to be something different or more than just the singer-songwriter of a rock band.
And this is the songs you were developing that ultimately did not become Captiva.
Yeah. So that was like 2006 or 2007. And then when I finally, we quit the first time, which was after Fangs. We went on a small tour, and then the label dropped us, and I was just ready to be done with the whole band thing, because touring was just, I was over it. We were in debt from tour. And so I was just like, I'm going to do composing now. And it was then that I, for the first time since I was younger, felt like that's what I'm supposed to do. And I felt, I was like in my skin again. But what I did is I started learning to write screenplays, because I was like, I can't get a movie. They already have Danny Elfman and Hans Zimmer and all these people. Right. And so I was like,
Goranson,
you know,
now.
yeah. And then he goes to him over and over. It's like they have their guy or their girl, and that's it. So I was like, I'm going to just have to write movies. But also my love for film and story were always hand in hand with composing. So I learned to write scripts, and it was a hard journey, just like writing songs when I was 17, and most of them were shitty. My scripts were really bad. And then I finally hit this moment, and I remember it very, very clearly. And it was around the same time that I met my wife, because I had just met her, and we didn't even really know each other. And I sent her the script because I felt like I hit the threshold, and I was like, the script doesn't suck. And I think that I want to share it with people. And so I met this girl. I was like enamored by her, but I was like, I think I could ruin this whole thing by sending her this bad script. But I had confidence.
Boy, do I get that. I mean, Jesse, there's just so many analogs between you and me. I'm a couple years behind, but like I'm relating to every single thing you're saying.
You send a couple scripts off is what you're saying.
Oh,
Tyler.
yeah. I sent my wife, well, what are some pretty bad scripts? But she loved me. So, it's okay.
Yeah, that's where I struggle with, like, my wife sees, she hears a lot of songs too from like the foundational point, and she's always really constructive. She's just a fan of like what I'm doing. So it's always nice to have that. But I just feel like I can't even have her read like the early scripts that I wrote. Right. But this script, luckily, was she loved it, and I was like, sweet, it made it past the girl that I was into. So that was like the moment where I knew that I was on the right trajectory. So ever since then, it's been just growth from that point into the world that I'm at right now. So one project in particular is a sci-fi series that I wrote, and my wife is also a writer. So I created the concept, and then her and I wrote the pilot together. It's called Calypsin. So it has some resonance with a little bit of concepts that I was touching on in the Falling Up universe, but it's sort of its own thing. In that it's being produced by Ethan Gross, who wrote Ad Astra, and Jason Taylor, who was a producer on X-Men and a couple other things.
So I'm curious, Jesse, when you present that to, a production company, a producer, etc., are you also like, is your writing like kind of separate from your music, or are you kind of pitching them both together of like, I have this idea, I have this concept, and also, hey, by the way, I can do the score.
I can take care of the score.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
pretty cool.
That's like a really unique position, right? Because I feel like most writers either want to like act or direct, but you have this like kind of different skill set,
like a secret weapon almost.
Yeah, it's just that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, a writer friend of mine, he told me one time that he went to he has his degree in like robotics, and so he's super smart with that stuff. But he's also a writer, and he's like, I would always go to people, and when I pitch my stuff to them, I'd be like, I've got my master's in robotics. And so he said that every time he'd say that, it was creating a thumbnail of who he is out of everybody else. And so that always resonated with me by like having a thumbnail. And he encouraged me that like, it's not just like everybody can have a thumbnail if you think about it and you try to work that out. Right. So yeah, I definitely have used, I never pitch something that I don't have at least one score to already. Cool. So yeah, that has helped me in a lot of ways, primarily because I always usually start, like if I'm pitching to somebody, that I am a composer by like my career, and I'm, a writer by moonlight. So I think it gives that impression of like, I'm not anything yet, but I have, the capabilities to be creative.
And that you understand that world from a different perspective, right? Which is going to grant you a little insight into your writing in a way that other people may not have. So hopefully that resonates with folks as you're pitching things, and they can be like, oh, he's bringing something entirely unique to the table. Because to be a composer is to understand the emotional impact of a story and the arc of a story in a way that, somebody with a robotics degree understands that concept entirely differently, right? Like not worse, just different.
Yeah, it's just different because I wrote about like something super techie. I'm just an idiot.
Right. Yeah.
I have to ask.
You're
my
punching
wife
above your weight a little bit.
Yeah, coming up with like whatever, like zoom in, like they don't know what they're talking about. Like say, enhance. That is kind of separate, like because it was just a story concept, and then I'm composing with it.
Cool.
But I've written some other stuff, and then 2 years ago, I was like thinking about kind of my journey as a songwriter and the things that I went through, and I honed in particularly on my struggle with Captiva and then ultimately Fangs, because there's like a lot of lore with Fangs where there's people online who, like on our Discord and stuff, they like go into all these theories and all this stuff, and it's really interesting to read. But I'm like, you guys are like, finding things that I didn't put in there. And so it's just wild world, right? That like people are kind of creating themselves within it. So it got me thinking, and so I wrote this script, and I'm so excited about it because it's a pseudo version of myself, and he's writing a concept album, and his concept album we're watching. The film is about him writing a concept album, and when we watch him perform the songs on the stage, when we hear the song, he'll start playing it or whatever on the stage, and then it'll go into what he's singing about, his like inspiration or his muse or whatnot. And so we're hearing like the construct of what he's working on, and sometimes those lyrics change depending on the story that we're seeing. And they're different than the lyrics that he sings to the audience. So the story is a fictional story about a songwriter who goes out to this seaside cabin to sort of pull a Bon Iver and like isolate himself and write a masterpiece. But he ends up meeting this woman who's kind of becomes his muse. And he sort of falls into like a ghost story. So it's just this whole like gothic tale that's woven along with this concept writer. But after I wrote it, and then I wrote some songs to go along with it, I pitched it to a couple people, and they were just excited that it was finally kind of the blend of the world that I had lived. Yeah. Because just writing like sci-fi and stuff, like I love all of that, but this is directly associated with my experience, and I feel like it's a very unique way for me to write, because I never really, they say write what you know, and I don't think that is always true to an extent, or it needs to be like true. But at the same time, I do feel like if you have a kind of a crazy experience, then to write about it is beneficial. Mm-hmm. So that's called Manzanita. But what I really want, and I haven't really told anybody this except for just some close friends and stuff, but I really want to get Donald Glover's attention. He's like impossible.
I want that. Yeah.
Because I want him to play the character who writes the album, because
this is perfect.
Because it would release as an album that he would sing on, and he would be the character Wilder Snow. And I just think it would be, I love him so much, and so
he's incredible.
I just want to work with him.
You're talking to the right people. We're all for sure.
We're low key obsessed with Donald. So
a little bit.
I fully support that casting decision.
Yeah, well, if you guys have him on your show, then
all right.
Definitely.
Yeah,
we'll let you know.
We'll
my name
see how much he wants to talk about 1,000-foot crutch or something. I don't know how we'll get him on, but we'll find a way.
Yeah, he might. I mean, I sometimes am surprised, man. Like, Well, Ethan Gross, who I work with on Calypso, he's a big fan of like a lot of the tooth and nail bands and stuff. A lot of people are around my age, like I'm surprised that everybody listened to those bands, back then, because it was, like I said, I think that's kind of going full circle back to where it's like, if your parents were not happy with a lot of cuss words and stuff, they were a safe bet, as far as that goes. So I think what you guys are doing is cool because it has so much influence on people's landscapes and their future.
Right. Well, that's kind of been our thing with this show. 'Cause like the big caveat that we always try to tell people is like, yes, our name is Church Jams Now, but it's like, it's very tongue in cheek. Like we don't want to be seen as like a Christian show, but we're trying to find this like shared language, right?
Yeah.
Of this like weirdly specific, but bigger than we anticipated community.
Yeah.
From the 90s and 2000s of like, this was like kind of a big deal for a lot of people. And
it was,
just finding a way to connect with people,
It was absolutely a big deal. When we first went on tour, we were out with Cutlass, which was, they were, most of those guys we like grew up with. So they weren't like we weren't like starstruck by them necessarily. The audience was huge. There was like 11,000 people a night. And, we were just opening. We were brand new. We came out, we played 4 songs. But that was just like a huge moment for me because I was like, this is just huge. And then we were also playing with tooth and nail bands, which, I was a kid and I went to Winterfest, which had Project 86 and then all these bands that we eventually toured with. And it was pretty weird. But I remember specifically on that tour, I went on a roller coaster because we got like, when we played at the theme parks, we would get to go up the exits and ride the roller coasters. But I always felt so bad because there was one time where there's just like, the longest line. And my wife and kids and I, we went to Disneyland this last January. And I thought about this the whole time because we'd be waiting in line for like an hour, right? And so we would go up the exits and there'd be these people just waiting for so long and we would get to take their seats that they were just about to go on. And I always felt so bad. But anyways, I went on a roller coaster and I sat next to Will, I think his last name is Will McGinnis. He was the bass player of Audio Adrenaline. Oh. And I listened to Audio Adrenaline when I was in middle school and it was weird. I was like, middle school me right now would be losing my shit to know that I'm riding on a roller coaster next to Will McGinnis. But, you grow up and you get cynical. And I think that's why, it's nice to talk about these things because age does make people cynical. And sometimes I find myself, forgetting that sort of innocence and also just your roots, it's you can't deny that that's where you grew up in the environment of. And so, I used to listen to Project 86 and then Andrew Schwab managed us for a little bit. So that was like
I didn't
pretty
know
weird
that.
too.
Well, speaking of Project 86, do you still keep in touch with Randy at all? Because I know he's in like the scoring world.
Yeah. He's
not scoring, but I guess sound effects or whatever.
Yeah, he's doing like sound design and trailers and stuff. And actually, for work, I do composing for pretty much anything that I can, because it's hard to find work in that world. But also, I'll do ads in documentaries and films and stuff. But I've been trying to get into trailers. And so that's like a whole other weird world of music, is just like how trailer construct works and stuff. But the last time I heard from Randy, he was doing some trailer stuff. And so I thought that was kind of cool because he's sort of one of the only people that I know in that whole kind of realm, other than, Aaron Sprinkle and some of the producers and stuff, that are still doing music. A lot of them either try, rehash their band or whatever, but for their day job, they're,
Yeah.
a realtor or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's always,
No, we've often talked about the like early 2000s band to realtor pipeline is very real.
yeah,
Very real.
it makes sense. I mean, that's where the money's at, but it's like,
yeah. And it's like, there's not a lot of, you don't have to go back to school.
yeah.
You can still use a lot of those. Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating to find people that are still doing it. We had Aaron Sprinkle on the show recently, and it was fun to tell him. So my day job is kind of complicated. I design like motion graphics for like churches and stuff, but like I work for a big company. And it was really fun when I found out that Aaron Sprinkle had a bunch of tracks on those like Soundstripe and Envato and Creative Market and stuff. I was like, oh, I'm going to use a bunch of Aaron Sprinkle tracks. And he was like, oh, that's weird. So his music is still being played across churches.
Oh, interesting.
all across America. But
Wow.
he's getting paid fairly for it. It's funny. Yeah.
That is interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't think that, I love Aaron's music, but I wouldn't think that it would be like, oh, but you're playing it though. Is that what you're saying?
No. I have like licensed some of his tracks.
Oh,
for,
yeah,
like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
For like
That's
backgrounds and stuff.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
That's
yeah. I was thinking that like that was a staple within churches was Aaron Sprinkle's music.
Nope.
Like, oh, that's okay.
99% of people will not know
music.
that it's Aaron Sprinkle.
Where were those
He's just
churches?
sneaking it in, man.
Yeah.
He's just doing it on the sly.
Yeah.
It's great.
Josh, TJ, do we have any other questions for Jesse? I think we're about to wrap it up. If that's cool with everyone.
I just wanted to follow up on Calypson. Is that in pre-production? What stage are we in with that project?
It's been so hard for me to not just turn this
into
a
believe
full,
you haven't
like,
gone full.
I know.
Yeah,
Kylan, I figured I'd
movie
do it
podcast.
for you.
Thank you.
I'll ask the movie questions just to give you a break.
I've been trying to like keep it on track with the music, but Jesse, really all I want to do is talk about all of your scripts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of in a weird spot right now. We worked for 2 years editing and just like putting it together. Ethan called it. It was like, when the network or whoever buys it and whatnot, when they ultimately want to like make changes, they're going to have you do all these changes. So that's why Jason Taylor was there to sort of be the voice of like, this is what they're probably going to ask you to do. So we just went through, I was like 47 drafts of it. Finally got it to a place that everybody's happy with. And then right now we're in the process of waiting for a showrunner to he's interested, but he just has to have like his schedule a little bit clearer.
Right.
And as soon as that happens, then it's kind of just going to go. So we're waiting for news on that. If that, it still hinges on like, if he's able to take it on.
Right.
But the good news is I've got a cool little team behind it that is, wanting to make it happen.
That's huge.
So yeah, I can't really go into too much on it, but I can. So I don't want to like say the showrunner, but it would be really neat to have this person on
Awesome.
As kind of the helm.
Can you tell us when we stop recording? It's totally. Listen, it's totally fine. You don't have to. I'm just very personally invested.
We're excited for you. That's what Kylan's trying to say. But no, that's really cool, man. That's super exciting, and all the best with that project.
Yeah, thank you.
From all of us at CJ.
I know.
And
Let's keep an eye out.
very cool.
Absolutely, it's such a weird world, like I always feel like it's kind of out of reach always in that world. So it's nice to just feel any kind of momentum or movement in it.
Yeah.
It's always, but that's how it starts, right? You just got to write your story in your room by yourself and dream that it's going to be something. So yeah,
That's it, man. I love that.
Someday we'll be sitting on our couch and just it will say written and scored by Jessy Ribordy on our screen.
Yeah, baby.
I hope so. Yeah, that would be a dream come true. And my wife is looking forward to that too, because it's been such a long journey. I mean, since we met, right? Like, that script was that script. So it has went through not just 47 changes, but all of the ones before that too. But,
yeah.
Once again,
awesome.
This is another episode of Church Hymns Now where we're going to give it up for cool wives. That's the only reason any of us do fucking anything.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, we got cool
so
wives.
If I have my wife's, if she's impressed with stuff, I'm like, I don't care if anybody else doesn't like it or whatever.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and she's always a really good gauge because she's got a good ear and eye for art and stuff. But yeah,
I get that. It's
Nice.
same with my wife, which is why she does not listen to this podcast. Josh, do you have any other final questions for Jessy?
I did have kind of like a more technical like songwriting question.
Yeah, let's
but
do it.
If Jessy wants to kind of get into it.
yeah.
So kind of like what you were talking about whenever you were talking about like restraints, the restraint of like being in a band and like what maybe creatively you can accomplish. I'm always curious, and especially with like what you guys are doing on your different albums where everything's like concepts and you're kind of exploring different worlds and everything. Are there anything like any like limitations you would put on like for this album, if we're like in this world, like we're going to use only like these certain sounds or scales or tones, or like we're going to stay away from this kind of language or like musically, like instruments, tones, anything like that you would be like, this world doesn't have this, or we don't want to evoke this kind of feeling? Were there any limitations that y'all would put in?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were quite a bit, like, well, when I did River Empires, the whole process there was, we didn't want it to be anything really band related as far as like rock band. So we didn't want like electric guitar and really too much electric bass. It was all more natural, organic stuff, acoustic guitars, mandolin, violins, and whatnot. So that was kind of the theme of that. But, it was also like Americana, and so we were kind of going for that vibe. So the new project that I'm working on, which is sort of like my new band called The Chilling Alpine Adventure, and it's transitioning from Falling Up to this new band, because out of all the composing that I do and writing, I still love to go back to rock music here and there. It's like I'm not done yet, and so this is sort of that outlet of that. And it's not an official Falling Up, because the last album was the final album, but this is sort of like has like the Falling Up seal of approval on it, and then it's sort of like passing the baton from one band to the next. So this project specifically, I'm definitely going for a certain feel with a lot of the kind of just overall vibe of mainly like the pads and the synths are a lot more subdued than I normally do. And so that's kind of like the overall feeling. As far as like thematically and lyrically, I absolutely stick to, what are those things called that have like a couple big words and then like medium-sized words and then smaller words?
Word clouds or...
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I basically have one of those in my head, and I have to hit, certain ones with albums. So if there's like a phrase or something that just kind of goes, that doesn't fit in that style of verbiage, then I tend to change it or whatever. So I'm kind of a big phonetic person though. So I'll take phonetics over, like I'll create a meaning if I have to, because if it matches the phonetics of what I'm saying, then I'd rather bend the lyrical meaning to the phonetics than the other way around.
Oh, that's cool. I like
it's like my biggest pet peeve is when a lyric is a lyric because they're trying to say something and it sounds like that's awesome to try to say something. That's kind of the whole point of singing in a song. But when it's like you can tell they're saying it because of the word, not because it actually sounds good in there, then I'm like, it just irritates me. So
yeah, I get that. Okay, I have another very technical question, and this relates to your day job. That's okay.
Yeah.
As a composer, what would you say is the balance of what you play versus like VSTs versus like, do you hire out any instruments or like specific instruments? You know, obviously it changes for every piece, but like
project to project.
Overall, like what would you say that balance is of like real instrument, VST, and then hiring out something that like for a fact you can't do?
Yeah. Solo violin is always hired out. I cannot for the life of me be happy with any VST of solo violin. Sometimes staccato's fine. But any kind of like fiddly, movement and that,
right.
I love inflections. I love like hearing kind of shifty intonation.
Yeah, you want it to feel human and spatial and real.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it touches more of like, the people's ears than they think.
Yes.
Yeah.
But most, if it's like anything really big, like orchestras, brass, like those are all VSTs. I use a lot of libraries, and whatnot, but pretty much in everything, I'm always EQing. I'm always like reworking.
Right.
I have a big thing where I never use something that like a preset. I have to modify it.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just for me. Like I don't think anybody would really know, but maybe because I have heard I don't know if you guys watch Orphan Black. We absolutely love the show, but the composer I wasn't super stoked on, and so I was like kind of criticizing, just personally and to my wife, right? Like it's just being like, no, this, I'm not really digging this. And then there's this sound that I used in Omni. It was like one of the only things that I didn't doctor or didn't mess with. I used it for a soundtrack that I composed for called Gold Dust. And it's just like shimmering kind of stringy pad, and it's really beautiful. And sure enough, like it was in there, and just like raw, undoctored, exactly like it. And I was like, oh, okay. Like,
wow.
All right. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, I use a lot of VSTs for, there's some big asks in like the mainly like the trailer world and even in the ad world. They will reference, some just epic masterpiece and be like, you have 2 days. And it's always 2 days. It's always so quick. And then I could talk
Christopher Nolan and we'd like it by Thursday.
Yeah. They
move on.
Yeah. And it's never too video. Like movies would be to film, but ads and trailers, I never get to actually see it. I just have to guess. But yeah, that's a whole other thing. It's a wild world, but but I do use a lot of VSTs, but when I do record, I like to, obviously do, real piano, acoustic, drums when I can, when it's just like a kick and snare, but when I can bring up the drums, and track a kit, it's nice. But something that I found as a little tip on, really any instrument in a VST is that I don't quantize it perfectly. I always quantize at random. It's just like 80%, 80%, because it just gives it that layer and that real feel to it.
Yeah.
I love that.
And then vocals, and people ask me sometimes to tune their vocals, and I am really picky about like making sure that that's one thing I can pick up on when I hear it on songs is just the auto tune. Yeah. It doesn't have to be the sharp things. It can just be regularly sung, and I'm like, I can tell that they coded it.
there's some melodyne going on in
it's
there.
too coded. And our albums, some of our early albums, like my voice was super coated with auto tune, but so like Dawn Escapes makes sense because I had like 3 days to record and I was still like singing terribly and whatnot. So I probably needed it for sure, but I do think that there was a level of like they could have finessed it a little bit more, made it sound a little bit more natural. So yeah.
Sweet. I love this. This last part is for no one but me. So I
Also
appreciate it. And TJ.
I loved it.
Yeah. But you know what? That's why we made this show, right? Fuck everybody else. We're here to talk to Jessy about the stuff we're interested in. Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap this up unless Jessy, there's anything else you specifically want to talk about. It's been fun for us to kind of like talk about the breadth of your career. I could also just talk about movies. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm sorry. I want to ask, just currently, off the top of your head, lightning round, what are your current top 5 favorite sci-fi movies?
My favorite movie of all time is Gattaca.
Hell yeah.
Wow.
Good movie.
Second sci-fi movie, Interstellar.
Yes.
Sweet. Nice.
Third is Brazil.
Fuck yeah.
All right.
Okay. I'll watch it, Kylan. I'll watch it.
Wait, you haven't seen it, TJ? Okay, the way
Not
TJ
yet, man.
reacted to
TJ haven't
Interstellar.
either, so.
Oh my God, guys.
I know.
Why are we even doing this show? Fuck this. Let's just do a Terry Gilliam show.
Robert De Niro in Brazil.
Okay. All right.
Terry Gilliam.
Sorry, Jessy, continue.
Oh man, it gets tricky now on the 4th and 5th because, I mean, Space Odyssey, 2001. That could be a little further up on the list, but it, it's not like it is a rewatch for me. Like I watch it often, but it's not as often of a rewatch.
As long as it's on the list, it's acceptable.
Yeah. And then I think that I would include this in sci-fi, but this might be cheating. But it's my 3rd favorite movie of all time, The Truman Show.
Oh yeah.
Oh, for sure.
I think that counts.
Okay.
That counts.
Yeah.
I also so Jesse said his first and his 3rd favorite movie, so now I have to ask what's your second.
Yeah. Okay. Forget the
He
first
seems
list.
like he already has a list.
Now let's just get your list. What are your top movies?
My second is loaded because it's the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Okay.
Hell.
I mean, you have to count it all as one.
That's
Yeah,
fair.
yeah.
And that just makes so much sense. Like that feels like a synthesis of everything you've told us that was the only missing piece.
Yeah,
like,
and it really just goes back to like it was very formidable when I watched it.
Well, they were game changers.
They absolutely were, and I've watched it every single year since then.
Wow.
We watch it. My wife and I watch it every Christmas.
Okay, that was gonna be my question. When?
Yeah. It's like early December. We have a tradition now where we go and get our tree, and then we start the trilogy. And I'm absolutely stoked for the day that I can have my son start watching it and my daughter. But my son's the oldest, so he'll probably be there sooner. And she'll probably be there at the same time. But yeah, I watched it every single year since then. So it's got that like,
Well,
nostalgia.
It's also like, yeah, I feel like specifically for, okay, Josh, TJ, I'm so sorry. I'm hijacking the show.
Oh, you totally have.
But
We're aware.
Okay, there's something too about like for a specific age of film nerd, the behind the scenes features for the Lord of the Rings were like revolutionary, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
they had like they were so extensive. It was like the extended edition DVDs with everything was like film school in a box. Like you got so much unfettered access.
Yeah.
In a way that like it doesn't exist anymore. They're incredible.
Yeah. The box sets are just, they are yeah, like you said, all the art and everything. I still have my original box set, and yeah, it's pretty cool. But we try to watch it on. I think this last year we watched it on HBO because we didn't want to connect the Blu-ray again, but we still tried to watch as much as we could on the actual discs, but they're like all scratched up and stuff. It's
right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep, just part of it.
All right. Well, I think this is as good a place as any. I didn't, but I'm going to restrain myself.
We'll have Jesse back. We can spin it off again for you, buddy.
We can do movie jams now again.
Absolutely.
At a later date.
Oh, yeah. We could.
I just want to talk about movies all the time.
Oh, absolutely. It just so many subjects too. I think we could just chat forever.
For sure. Well, Jesse, it's been so much fun having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. And if I can just do a quick little promotion for
please.
My Patreon, which is the Echo of the Night, has some new material on there, and then we've got some new music coming out. So if you hit up my website or the Patreon, you'll see that. But yeah, I really appreciate it, guys. It's an honor. I love talking to you guys, and this is it's really great and honestly therapeutic too.
Good,
which is
We're
always
here for
nice.
that.
Well, it's a treat for us as well. So
yeah,
we appreciate it, man.
Definitely. Okay, so I'm going to give our final spiel. If you like this, we have more nonsense like it at patreon.com/churchhymnsnowpodcast. From all of us here at the CJN crew, may all your favorite bands stay together. And of course, peace out, Montrers.
Church Jams now.
I'm learning French right now because we have this book that is like our family lineage. And I have a direct uncle who's just straight up French. Like he speaks very little English, but he has a Nobel Prize for inventing some piece of the microscope. So it's like, it was just like super bizarre. And then he also worked at CERN, the like Hadron Collider. Mm-hmm. So I was really interested in talking to him, and I tried emailing him, and it was like very short. He was like, basically, I don't speak English, but I would love to talk to you. So I want to like learn French just so I can talk to him, go over there and find out all this weird stuff.
That's the best reason to learn a language, to like learn more about distant family
about your genius uncle.
Incredible life. Yeah. That's incredible.
That's wild. Yeah, I don't even want to talk about music. Let's just talk about cool family history.
French uncles.